So in our last episode of Hot Rodding the Slant 6, we were talking about the oil pan and windage and the things that we were doing to work around that. And in the comments, we got a lot of responses on that video, more than I was expecting. I was surprised. But in the comments section, several things kept coming up over and over again. So I figured let's address these things and then we can move forward from there. So we'll start with the simplest of them all. And the first is that a lot of you guys are like, why did you paint the inside of the block? So, and why did you use the Rust-Oleum? Because Glip-Tool is the thing. Right? When I'm doing a race engine or a very limited use street engine, so you know the kind of thing that only goes out to play in and you put it away, I always paint the inside of the engines. Several reasons. You know, the first is that it smooths the pores and it speeds oil drain back. The second is that it seals the pores. Engine blocks often have like little trapped casting, sand and stuff like that. And if you paint it, it kind of just seals all of those things in there. And then also, a lot of times, you'll use an engine, you'll use a block for like a season, you know, a year, or even just a race or two, and then it gets put off to the side. When you paint them like this, they stay nice. So all you have to do is just give it a quick wipe down and you put it back into service. And also, you know, the other thing too is that when there is a problem, you could spot it really early. But that's all besides the point. And we use the Rust-Oleum. Glip-Tool, which is an electrical motor paint, is the one that is like most accepted to do this with. But I found years ago that the Rust-Oleum Rusty Metal Primer works really good. It doesn't flake off, it doesn't chip. Preparation and cleaning is really important. You want to hit it with mineral spirits, you want to make sure there's no films of anything, and then let it, you know, paint it on, and then you got to let it cure. So that's it for the paint. Now, the second thing was, what that kept coming up over and over again was, why don't you put a dry sump in it? Dry sump. Like as if you guys think I've never heard of a dry sump. I've run dry sumps. I know all about dry sumps. The dry sump is out of the budget nature of this build. So here's something you have to understand about this channel and about everything we do here, okay? When we start working on a project, a car or an engine or anything like this, the very first criteria is this something that the average guy can accomplish using average means in his home garage or shed or backyard? Is this something that a guy who has to steal a couple of dollars away from the you know, household money, you know, 20 bucks here, 50 bucks there, is this something that that guy who's working on that kind of extreme budget, is this something that he can do himself? And that's the criteria for just about everything we do on this channel. Uncle Tony's Garage is not a dick swinging contest. We're not here to impress anybody. We're not here to prove how cool we are, how much we know, or anything like that. We're about teaching. We're about sharing the experience of hot rodding, especially with guys who are, you know, just getting into it, learning the basics. And we try to keep things as generic as possible. So this is a Slant 6 build, but the ideas and the principles here can be applied to any engine. And we try to keep things in that context. So that's why no dry sump. The average guy working in average means cannot do a dry sump system. There's all sorts of different ways to skin the cat, but this is the way that the average guy can do it in his house. So that brings us to the third thing now. You guys wanted to see the oil pan. So when you last saw this pan, we had it in the truck and we filled it with a gallon of water, and that was to represent the oil, you know, 5-quart fill, approximately a quart between the filter and circulating through the engine. 4 quarts approximately would be in the sump. So we put a gallon in there, and the first thing we noticed that at rest, right, sitting flush, that the oil or the water was actually trickling past this point. The water had come to above the level of the seal. Well, why is this a problem? Let me show you on this engine. Here's that same point on the engine, right, on the pan. And if you notice, the connecting rod is below that level. So this engine is creating windage before it's even moved forward. Just sitting there idling is kicking oil up into the crankcase. The counterweight on this engine also does the same thing. Now the counterweight on the crank that we're using is much smaller. Let me rotate this motor, show you that. So here's the counterweight, the back counterweight on an earlier 1960 through 1980, 1960 to 1980. This is the size and the shape of the counterweight. And you can see on the crank that we're using, it's over here, the counterweight is significantly smaller. So we don't have to worry about the counterweight dipping down into the oil, but that rod definitely is. So the very first thing we did was we went and we sought capacity. We wanted to take as many of the, we wanted to expand the pan as many ways as we could. And for that, well, just a couple of trusty ball peen hammers. So a couple of things if you're going to do this. I'll show you what we did here. You can see we opened this area, we dropped this down, we worked all in here, flattened that. We took out any areas that were like concave that were in the pan and spread them out. And you do that with a hammer. First you want to use a smaller hammer than is necessary. And you don't want to be blasting this thing. When you're going to shape metal, you want to do it just the weight of the hammer and a little bit of a push. It's a tapping. It's like hundreds, like thousands of taps, to where you actually, wear the skin off your fingers, right? But you want to do the job the right way. That's how you do it. And the reason why you go easy is because as you're tapping it, the metal is going to work harder. And you'll actually hear it change. As you tap it on the metal, you hear ding, 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 ding. And as you keep going, you'll hear it drop. Ding, dong, 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 dong. When it gets flat like that, you stand a chance of cracking it. So move to another area, take your time. But what we did was we managed with that same fill, now we have the level of oil, the one gallon, we have the level of oil down way underneath the seal. So this thing won't be creating any windage at idle. And also, we need to have a gap between our pan and an air gap between the windage tray and the pan. So all of that's very important. This thing is still rough. We're working on this, so we're going to get to this in a minute. So that's what we did with this. Now, working with the slant pan is a bit of a mind jump, okay? Because intuitively, like, oil pan, the round part is, the bottom, but on the slant, this thing goes this way, this way, this way, all different. So when you're going to work on one of these things, make sure it's oriented the way it's going to be in the car, or you're going to find yourself doing things that afterwards are completely counterproductive. And here's another helpful tip. When you're beating on one of these things with a hammer, don't leave your phone sitting on the side over there, because you'll end up cracking yet another screen. So, at any rate, that's what we did as far as the actual pan itself goes. Now, the next step was to start fitting the tray. If you remember in that video, as soon as we hit the gas, the sump just literally just emptied itself out. It flowed over this area like there was no resistance at all. And as we explained in that video, all of that oil is now going to get caught up among the connecting rods and the counterweights. It's all up in the crankcase, creating windage. And in the case of the slant, deadly windage. So the very first thing I did before I started working on the tray was I welded this piece of sheet steel in here. And you can see it's bent at a 90 and it's welded along the bottom right here. Okay, so and I did that first because now I need to make the tray conform to that. So here's what I do with the tray. As we explained, the edges, the sides of this thing are going to be open approximately 1/4 of an inch, and that's so that oil can drain down between the oil pan and the tray without actually getting involved in this. So then we cut this section out. We cut this section out so that the sump can fit up underneath it. So, and this area is really not much to be concerned with. This section here, we folded this into a bit of a flange, and the front of the tray will get welded right along this line, and we'll leave this open right here and right here so that anything can drain back that way. As it turns out, we lucked out. The number 6 connecting rod corresponds with this hole here. The number 5 rod corresponds with this hole here. So as the rotating assembly is going this way, it'll throw the oil, and the oil will get caught in these openings. Now, we had to hammer form this part of the tray to fit this, and that's why this had to be welded in place first, because you wouldn't have a reference point for bottom if you didn't have that in there. So we hammer formed this part of the tray to correspond with our what would we call that? We have to call that something. Our baffle. Okay, our baffle. So now, when the oil is going to head backwards, it hits the baffle, and it's also deflected up to this part of the pan. And that's going to keep the vast majority of oil down in the sump where we need it and out of the crankcase. So that's where we're at with that. We still have some work to do as far as just smoothing, and because it's all janky at this point. And we're not going to win any shows with this thing. We're not trying to. We're just looking for a nice functional piece. So that's where we're at with that. The next time you see this, it'll all be welded to it. Somebody needs to tighten their belts. Next time you see this, it'll be all welded together and good to go. So we're not going to assemble anything until we have all of our parts together. The next thing we're going to turn our attention to is Valvetrain. Comcams is going to cut us a deal on some parts, so we're going to go with them. And I don't know what profile we're going to use yet. The motor's got to work in it 3,500 to 5,500 RPM range. It's a stick, so anything under 3,500, we don't have to work a converter. We can just come off the clutch. And then above 5,500, this head ain't going to flow it. So it's that tight range, and that's where we're looking to make all of our power. We'll consult with them. We'll see what they recommend for a starting point, and that's what we'll go with. But other than that, I think we're good to go for now. And I'll see you tomorrow.